All right, at 7:19 on January 26th, I call this a meeting of the Historic Landmark Board of the City of Westminster to order. If we could have the roll call, please.
Gargi Gupta.
Here.
Linda Grabio. Here. Karen Hardy.
Here.
Sarah Lorak.
Here.
Mary Oswell.
Here.
Tennille Wood is excused. She will be joining us late if she can, but excused. And Alana Mace.
Here.
And also joining us for the next meeting will be our new alternate, Keith Teeter, who is replacing Miss Young, Anna Lesky Young, who has resigned from the board, as you all know. But he cannot be here tonight. He will be here next meeting. So we have a quorum.
Excellent. Can I have a consideration of the minutes from the previous meeting? Were there any questions, changes, corrections? Hearing none, I ask for a motion to accept the minutes of the last meeting.
I move to accept the minutes.
Second.
I second.
Those in favor of the motion to accept the minutes? Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Oops, sorry. Are there any oppositions? Excellent. So we are on to new business. Rich, with the landmark housekeeping.
So just a couple of items here. First, I think we need to take a pause because I believe, according to the bylaws of this board, is there any consideration necessary for electing officers? I only ask because in our minutes it stipulates, I'm sorry, in our bylaw it stipulates that we do this at the first meeting of the year. I only know that because I just read them before this meeting.
Do we have to have a motion for this, or does it just go into?
We do have to have a motion for it, and the motion can be that we don't need to change anything, but that's up to you. So I will just politely listen.
I think if there's nobody who has objection, I say we put forth this motion to have no changes to our board and organization.
I second
I'm sorry, who seconded?
that. Sarah.
Okay, so thank you, Sarah.
Is this a hands, or do you want to poll the?
We can do show of hands if it's unanimous. Everybody show hands.
Favor?
Let the record show that that is a unanimous vote by all board members present to keep the board member officers as they currently are. Sorry, back to you, Mary.
I was wondering about that, but okay. Then back to landmark housekeeping.
So Mary and I actually met individually to go through a couple of concerns that we addressed at the last meeting. Mainly, we know that there are some things that are out of whack on the website, but this is kind of like a chain reaction here. We have to do these in kind of order. And in doing our due diligence, one of the things I agreed to do, you'll remember, was to go through all of the applications by date that landmarks were designated landmarks. And that would establish at the very beginning a numbering system. So they have all been assigned. And I believe I emailed that to the entire board. Did everybody receive that? Yes. So going by the dates that council designated those landmarks, that is the official order, which was a good starting point for us. So moving forward, any brochures, websites, everything will now be in the order by chronological history. Does that meet everybody's expectations? Are we good with that then?
First of all, I think it's great. Second of all, I appreciate that. I know you sent some of us the giant file of all the information, which is useful and in some cases kind of surprising that there are things missing that we would have thought might have been there, but be that as it may. And I think this is nice because it makes clear what we have landmarked and what we have kind of quasi-grandfathered in for a while that we haven't actually landmarked. The question that brings up for me with respect to the ones that those on the bottom that we did not landmark but have other landmark designations, it would be my intention, I would think, to have those non-city landmarked things noted on our webpage as historic sites that are not landmarked by the city. Rich and I talked about there are certain things that have enough significance that they're certainly historic places in our city. So that's one point to bring up about that. And my other question with respect to that is, with respect to especially the Harris Park School and Union High School, and to some degree Metzger, are those locations that we should approach their ownership about being landmarked by the city, because since they are not. Certainly the high school and the two schools are formidably important in the city of Westminster. So that's sort of two questions, but Gargi.
So one question I do have is because I saw there are 18 landmarked based on that spreadsheet that I'm looking at. It's 18 of them, and there are 5 which are state and national. The last one on the 5 below that line, it says not within city limits. How do you want to identify that? Because that is the one that raised the question for me. Does that make sense?
It does. It is a weird thing because it is not in the city of Westminster, and yet it is 100% surrounded by the city. So I still think if you make, to my mind, if you make those annotations when we add them to something that we're clear that the university building is not in the city, and yet you can't get to it unless you come by helicopter without driving over Westminster City Street. And that's, to be honest, that's part of why it is hard to categorize. So, but I do think if we have important to Westminster historic sites and we leave that off, if we don't, people are going to think it's going to seem a little odd. But I think the important thing here is to make sure that we make a designation on our site of what we have landmarked and what maybe are other significant buildings that haven't been landmarked by the city, but are encompassed within our boundaries in some way. I mean, I know they're not within the city boundaries, but this is a weird, I don't know if anybody else who works in this has ever come across this kind of a weird dichotomy. It's not something I've had to deal with before. Where I'm from in San Diego, you're either in a city or you're in the county. And if you're in the county, then everything you do is done by the county and everything. Here, we don't have these islands of county within a city to deal with. So I don't know if anybody else,
Well, technically, I think Westminster University is in the county because it's not incorporated into any other community, is it?
No, it is in the county. That's why I said that entity for me is hard to, I've never had to deal with a structure like that was surrounded by a city, but's in a county. Where I'm from, if you're in the county, you'd be a county thing. And obviously Adams County could landmark it if it were such a thing that Adams County did. But I first of all, thank you, Rich, for doing all of this. This is great. I think it's very important going forward that we have a good idea of what we have done. I think there's a little bit of lost history to this board, not on purpose by anyone, but we've had different people within the city that have helped us, and we don't keep our board members forever. So being able to know, yes, we've landmarked 18, and whatever the next one is, it'll be 19. As I said, my other question is, with the two schools, especially, is it? I'm curious as to what the board thinks about the appropriateness of approaching the school district and saying, you have all the paperwork from the state and the national registers, and yet you're not landmarked by the city you're in, and you are more important to Westminster, the city, in many ways, than many of the buildings we've already landmarked. I mean, there's 130 years of history in the Harris Park School, or whatever you're going to call it, since it's had 47 names. Does anybody else feel that way, or is that just me?
So the question I have, I'm kind of tagging on to it, is since they're already in the national and state registers, is there a common, can the board kind of pass a resolution that we would like to get all of them, which are already national and state registered, on the local register as well? Because obviously national and state trumps us, but it's something for the city to kind of have bragging rights on, like we have 5 of them or 4 of them. You know, technically the 5th one is not within the limits, so we should just clarify that on our website, that it's around us, but it's not within the city limits. But I think that would be a good idea. Isn't that what you're asking about, Mary? That's what I'm understanding, correct?
Well, and I know that the Bowles House is also state and nationally registered, but they also applied to be registered in the city, or by the city, I should say. And I suspect the school district would be happy with that. If there were some way we could approach them and say, we'd like to make sure you're on our list too. I don't know, I didn't see anything in our bylaws that sets this out in any kind of formal way. So I don't know what it would mean going forward to look into that. But yeah, it would be nice if we could. I think this kind of goes to the next thing, which is background information. In the file that Rich sent, which has all of the documentation of all of our landmarking, in general, most of the applications offer the criteria that they believe their building or space is significant for in their applications, of which we have in our bylaws 15, which in terms of, say, the Bowles House, just because the application said it exemplifies specific elements of architectural style or period, which is the first criteria. There are other buildings that would have an architect. So when we get to why is something landmarked, those criteria are would be a shorthand way for us to know for our purposes why an individual property was landmarked, what they offered as the reasons, and what we agreed to when we sent it to the city to be landmarked. So it's a shorthand, as it were, for why things are on our registry. And to that end, there are certainly things within the paperwork on the other structures that lend themselves to those reasons as well. There, as Karen and Gargi know, there's a sort of standard set of those criteria that are out there. And the same, there are many of those that would apply to the things that have been landmarked that have not applied to us for that. Does that make sense? Did I go too fast for anybody? I'm not seeing nodding and I'm not seeing shaking. So
one housekeeping thing, the last link, the last method had a way to raise our hands, and maybe I'm missing it, but I hate to interrupt, so I'm not sure how we can do that. Sort of like, hey.
Yeah, well, yeah, raising your hand is fine. I have no problem with that. See,
There's also there is a chat feature.
yes.
Okay.
You can also say, hey, I want to talk. So, okay, the floor. You have the floor. So with the first idea of I don't know where we go with something like this, Rich, with the idea of, well, they've been nationally, if we were to, and I use the school district because I know the school owns both the two schools.
So the board has the authority to send a letter on behalf of the board, and we can even have board letterhead. In fact, such a thing does exist, and it could be a letter written by you, Mary, representing the board, or whoever wants to work on it. But you could send a letter and just say, on behalf of this, we wanted to invite you to consider at least, and here are the benefits, blah, 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 blah. Here's why it's important to our community. That is certainly under the purview of this board.
With respect to the two schools in particular, I think that would be appropriate. Especially since both those buildings are on the national and state registers as well. So if that's something we could work on, I don't know what the easiest way to do that going forward would be, but do you want a motion to that effect?
I'm sorry, are you asking me?
Well, I mean, do we need a motion to that effect? Sorry, my Robert's Rules of Order.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to send a letter on behalf and you want to make a motion for a call, but you'd probably want to know who's going to work on it, or whose letter is going to be from. But yes, you can make that motion because it's an official communication. I would think that it's appropriate to have a motion.
Okay. Well, since it was my idea, I make a motion that we approach the Westminster School District about having the Harris Park School and the Union High School apply for the city's landmark designation.
I second.
Sarah? Oh. Oh, you are voting already? Okay.
You haven't asked us, I guess.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, is there any, is the discussion part going to imply who needs to work on this letter, Rich, before we vote on it?
Well, I maybe not. I mean, somebody has to write it though. And I don't know who you have in mind to write it, but it should come from the board. I'm happy to assist with that by dressing it up or putting a little spin on it, but it really should come from the board.
Well, I will be willing to write the letter. If there's somebody out there who's got a little more experience in this that might know the verbiage better, Karen Gerge. I'd be willing to have help. I'm not, but if that's the case, then
I'm
all right.
happy to help. I've just been part of designation conversations. I've not necessarily invited anybody in the past to be part of this, so I'm happy to help.
So
Yeah, usually it's the owner that is asking if they can be landmarked or listed in the National Register,
So,
whatever.
yeah, this
But we
letter
can
would be
invite them.
just acknowledging that they already have designations at the state, but we wanted you to be familiar with our program, and hopefully you'll consider it because we think this would benefit you blank, 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 blank. If you'd want to talk more about it, then you make an invitation, and if there's interest, I'd be happy to set up a meeting between some of us and Dr. Duffy, or but we can certainly take it to the next step if there's interest. So you're just basically putting it out there as an FYI and asking if there's interest.
okay. Well, based on that, we had a motion and a second. Are those in favor of proceeding? It looks.
So the record is that unanimous vote to move forward with drafting a letter.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
can I ask two questions on that? One is we are just talking about 2 of the 4. We are not talking about the other 2, right? That's the first.
Yeah.
Okay. The second question I have is, and this may be something that Rich, you may have more of an answer. If we are a locally designated historic site, does CLG offer some extra benefits to a local historically registered site opposed to the state and national? Because it's called marketing, right? You want them to want some benefits to come be part of the local register. So I'm just wondering if there's something like that.
Well, there is. There are benefits that are offered in terms of being able to get loans, et cetera. But the point, I think it's important for this board to realize that in truth, my understanding, and I attended the webinar actually the other day that I invited everybody to go to, but that webinar, they were talking very specifically about the fact that your local designation is really what tends to have teeth in terms of protecting a landmark. Your state and your historic do not have that power. It's at the local level. So that's worth considering. But of course, if you do have, as this board knows, that by placing it in the program, then you do have to agree in perpetuity to follow the restrictions that are meant to preserve the history of that. So any kind of changes that would need to be done to the property have to come before this board for approvals, et cetera. That's the other side of it. And that's not a bad thing, but it just, there is a perception some people might be uncomfortable with. And, if we can educate them on the benefits of it and how it's important to the community, that's how I would approach that.
Okay.
But there are all sorts of resources available as a CLG, everything from doing surveys to documenting the property, low cost, you get tax credits for any work you do on it that meet the necessary criteria. There's a long list of benefits.
Karen?
I would say maybe working on the 2 schools and making that invitation to them should be seen as a precursor to approaching the other 2 properties that are listed on the state and national register for that same sort of designation, because it would make sense for all of those within our jurisdiction to at least be invited to become local landmarks.
Yes, and I do feel that I thought I would start with those 2 because we're talking about the same agency with both those properties. I do not believe we'd have a problem with Metzger, especially because it's a joint Adams County, Westminster group. The Gregory House is a privately owned residence, so that might be a little different, but I do think that if we've done the others, that gives us an opportunity to write them and just say, this is a thing we think is appropriate. And so, okay, I think that's a great step forward, and it also is part of this cleaning up the bookkeeping.
Absolutely. And just for the benefit of those of you that did not receive the giant email, it's a very, very large zip file that I sent to Mary as board chair because she had asked, but also to those that are working on the summer tours coming up, because there's good information there to pull together the narrative for those tours. So by no means that I mean to exclude everybody. It's just, if you want it, I'll be happy to send it to everybody. It is a very, very large file with all kinds of, it's basically everything. So
I was going to say the other thing that's nice about those is that when you pull out the actual applications, almost all of them refer by number to our criteria. So we can easily add in all of these designations what the criteria for those individual places are in a handy fashion that anybody new, like our new board member who comes on, can go to his notes that have the charter for the landmark board and know this is here because of its architecture. This is here because of its significant, those things.
So
Karen, oh, sorry.
no, I know we have some people that want to speak, but I want to say that my intent, to be absolutely clear, is to have that information for everybody. I'm just trying to figure out a more manageable way so you don't have piles and piles and piles of directories. I'd rather just, either add it to the binders that we give out as part of orientation or some kind of record that's a little more digestible. So that's the only reason I didn't send it to everybody, because it's definitely overwhelming if you're not expecting it.
Karen.
I was just going to mention, when we get around to an invitation for the Gregory House, we can certainly use the examples of the other locally landmarked, privately owned properties that already exist. If they need convincing that it's not an onerous problem for them to be designated.
And the other thing I think that would be nice about this, and it's one of the things that came in the giant folder of stuff, is when the Bowles House got themselves locally designated, there was a newspaper article about the fact they did that. So there's also some publicity here for us as the landmark board that I think would be helpful, getting our name out as to why we are doing these things. So, and Sarah had a comment question.
I was just going to ask Rich if he could send me the giant file of stuff. Thanks.
I will warn you, at least a few of those things that are in there, I could not get to open. Most of them are PDFs and things like that, but there were a couple of them that were like, I will change all the information in this file if you open it. And I went, nope, I didn't. But just be aware there might be a couple of those in there. So.
Yeah, there might be a software conflict or something if they were done in publish. I don't know. I didn't look honestly at everything in there because there's so much.
This is a little bit related to this landmark housekeeping. For another project, I have been in contact with John Van, who is one of the city architects, about the Wesley Cemetery. And when I talked to him in like November, he said, this is great, but don't talk to me till January. So one of the things is I'm hopeful that the second half of that project will go forward based on what he has said. That would be nice because it will make that property a little more visitable to people as one of the properties that is owned by the city, and it'll make it a little more welcoming to people because there'll be some signage and some things like that. I am, fingers crossed, hopeful that will add another little feather in our caps to interesting things people can do in the city with landmark facilities. Okay, are we good with A1 and 2?
I have a quick comment. When I look at the spreadsheet, maybe it's just me because I'm kind of more into the details. So every landmark structure has the prime historic significance element noted. It's either the exterior or the interior, ABC, right? So I'm wondering if at some point it might be a good thing on the spreadsheet to just have a column added for notes, which sort of talks about those pieces, because the landmark board, and again, like I said, maybe it's just me, but when I look at those, I kind of like to know at a quick glance, hey, you know, these are the reasons why it's historically significant. It doesn't have to be major, just little notes on the side. Do you think that's a eventually good idea? I'm not expecting it to happen right away.
Sure. If that's how you want that information presented, we could certainly add that. That was not my intent. It was just basically to establish the order. It took me a while just to find out the dates, but we can certainly add that. Yes, absolutely.
Well, and based on what's in all of that stuff, Rich did a ton of work to make sense of it. So, okay, if that's all of that, the summer tour update.
So just all I wanted to preface that subject was that we did get some feedback from the Westminster Historical Society, who had a strategic retreat this past weekend. They're very excited. So this is a really viable and exciting partnership. They offered some possible itineraries, and really what happens is we need to get our working group with their working group and to work out those details. And now that we have this information finally compiled, that you can, you know, kind of put together an itinerary, I think that can move forward. And Linda, I think Linda's still with us. There's a dark square. Linda, are you there?
I am here, but I am frozen and so are you, but I can hear you.
Okay, well, good to know you're still there. Linda, would you be able to help us in terms of setting up another additional work group just so we can flesh that out a little more?
Of course.
Because what I have just initially, and I'm just going to do this at a very, very high level, they had recommended on the June 11th date a bus tour of the historic Westminster corridor right there on 72nd, and but also including a Bowles House stop and a History Center stop. And you know, I know we had talked about how that might make a long tour, and we'll have to work on those details of how much time people are actually spending on a bus. So that's one option. July 9th, we had a bus tour of the Schoenberg Farm. And it's worth noting that there's a lot of density in Westminster on these dates. We purposely scheduled these so they would correlate with the second Saturday Arts District tour. But also on July 19th, that's the date of the Historical Society's vintage baseball game. So, I mean, we can find synergies there, and I think we absolutely should. August 13th, the proposed tour might be Wadsworth Boulevard from 92nd to Uptown Avenue, possibly looping in Semper Farm. That same day, the city is hosting in the Historic District a World Culture Festival. So again, we're building lots of options here. And finally, on September 10th, it was proposed maybe doing the Northeast quadrant. So Savory Tower, the Mushroom Tower, Metzger Farms, and the cemetery, Wesley Cemetery. So that's just a starting point, which I think is great. But we do need to coordinate that meeting so that we can actually, and I'm happy to include my planning staff in those meetings as well. So they are the experts at logistical arrangements, and they'll be the ones that are making sure the buses show up where and what time, and that we have food to give and all that good stuff, drinks, etc. So I'm assuming that it was Linda, and was Sarah, were you working on that or just the digital piece of that?
I would like to work on it. Yeah, I can help with like the digital aspects of it.
I think it's Tennille that was working with Linda, and she's just, of course, not able to be with us tonight. She's excused. But maybe I'll just start an email chain, Linda, and get everybody connected. Will that work?
That would be marvelous.
Fantastic.
Am I remembering correctly that part of what we want to have grow out of these bus tours is the possible information for the historic landmark brochure, whether it be online or paper or all those things. So that would be something we hope would be coming out of the narratives that go into this.
We're going to have a common narrative that we can use in many different ways. And it makes sense if you're doing it once and doing it thoroughly, we can adapt it as we need it. Yes.
Okay, that sounds great.
Website as well.
Yes, well, and I think that would be wonderful. And I had a thought that has left me, so I guess it's just going to be gone. Do we have any consideration of old business?
I do not.
A hand, Karen.
I guess it would be in the minutes. I had asked about what my term limit was because I'm not sure whether, because I'm going to be at some point term limited out and I didn't know when that was happening. And Rich, you indicated you would check into that.
I am a terrible failure, Karen, because I did not ask that question.
It's not a, we've got a year.
But I will. As I reported earlier, though, you're not on the anytime soon. I think the next two was Linda Graybeal and Gargi, I think, are the two that have a term expiration. So you were beyond that, but I just don't know the particulars, and I'm awfully sorry. I'll have to follow up on that. I'm taking the minutes as we speak, so it's definitely in there again.
Okay.
Do we have conference education information?
Nope.
Karen?
Again, I was mentioning to Rich when I got into the sound problems before the meeting officially started, I've signed up for the virtual day of the Saving Places conference. At my age and with the vagaries of the weather and slipping and sliding around, I decided I'll do the virtual piece and not have to worry about the weather because over the years, we've had some really nasty blizzards during the Saving Places conference. But I just wanted to let everybody else know so that you could, those of you who are younger and maybe have not been to the live conferences, they're really great. There's so much energy and networking and so forth that goes on that, and you know, the session options are so varied. So I'd like to encourage anybody who has the time to attend on either the first 2 days for some of the conference.
Do we know what those dates are?
Yes. Monday, February 7th, Tuesday, February 8th, and then the virtual is Wednesday, February 9th.
I might be able to make that.
And Rich, do you have the link to the savingplacesconference.org, or can you share that? That's if you look up savingplacesconference.org, you'll find the website.
I can send that first thing in the morning, and I'll also include the link where you can follow the webinars that are regularly scheduled through the CLG program, because they do on a consistent basis. They just had CLG 101, which is the webinar I was referring to earlier. But those also count towards our requirements. We do have a set number of hours that we have to have training every year. We usually pick it up at Saving Places, frankly, but those do count as well. So tomorrow morning, I will draft a quick email with the links to Saving Places as well as that webinar link, so you can follow along their calendar of events, because they're really helpful as well.
And
Rich,
anything?
do you know if they,
Sorry, go ahead, Alana.
Rich, do you know if they videoed the CLG 101? I had another meeting at that time, but I would love to have seen that. You know, if it's available in any other format.
I'll include that information as well. I believe it was recorded, so I'll include that link if I can find it, or if not, how you can get it.
Thank you
Yes.
so much.
All right. Meeting schedule is on the agenda. God, words, they are important. Did not get a lot of sleep last night, so I'm running on fumes. God knows if we'll ever get together in person again, but it would be nice. Rich, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I'm going to support whatever you guys want. If we have the all clear to go back into City Hall, I wouldn't object to having in-person meetings. But earlier we had said that we would have digital meetings unless, you know, there was a reason for us to come together. Obviously, if there's a public hearing, I think there's for a landmark, then clearly that would be better to do that in person if conditions allow for it. I have no problem with that. Yeah. I do want to make sure that before we adjourn that we give a shout out to Councilor Emmons and allow her to say a few remarks. Councilor?
Hi all. Thank you again for the wonderful conversation. It's been great to listen to you all, and I know that I say this every time, but thank you for doing what you do for our city. I'm looking forward to this year and all the tours that we have and working with you all on executing that. I think it will be wonderful for our community and for our residents to really get to know our city and just be a part of something greater than, excuse me, than all of us. So thank you again for all of that you do. I will say that I was part of the Metzger Farm open space meeting today, and they actually talked about maybe making the farm a museum. So there might be some more opportunities for this board to offer some input and insight into making that area or one of the houses a museum. It's really initial stages talks. We had asked staff to look at what the costs are, because I know it's an initial cost for a startup for a potential museum. But I think that there's lots of great opportunities for our board to maybe plug in to help assist in a directional piece of that. So there's more to come on that, but I just wanted to thank you for all that you do.
Okay. If there is nothing else, oh, Gargi.
I do have one question. I know that we are supposed to complete certain hours of training as board members. And I know we also have to do the city council thing every couple of years. I just would like to know where to go to see that, so all of us are up to speed on it. And for something inadvertent, we're not, you know, not in compliance.
Yes, I believe that information is part of the bylaws. It should be in your binders. So new members may not have gotten one of these yet, but we can certainly get them to you. It's basically a folder that has the bylaws, it has the ordinance that established this board, city resources, basically the municipal code. But in that, it says that the requirements are that these are set by the State Historic Preservation Office. You have to do things like submit your minutes. You have to have at least one board member attend an approved educational session each year. So that's either one of their webinars or Saving Places, for instance, or I'm sure they approve nearly anything as long as it's related. Yeah, and they do we have to do an annual report every year, and I just quietly do that behind the scenes. It's just making sure that we've provided all of that information to them, and they do review it on an annual basis. And then every so many years, they do a more substantial audit. They did that, I believe, two years ago, maybe, when we were dealing with the proposed changes to the rodeo market, and actually we had our auditor was sitting in the audience for that meeting. So I think that's every 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, but that is that's also in your binders. And for those of you that haven't gotten them, I'm going to be putting together one for our newest member, so you should have them as well. I'll have to figure out how to get them to you. We usually do that and hand them out when we do onboarding, but we haven't had one of those with the pandemic. And I know we're eager to get back to doing that, but that just hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Unless there's anything else? Karen?
I'll just mention in passing, I had the interesting experience of getting a couple of weeks ago a notification on my COVID app that I had possible exposure to the virus. So I had to go in and get my PCR test and everything, and it came out negative. But that silly bug is still out there, and you never know when or how you're going to run across it. So we have to still be cautious.
Absolutely. All right, seeing that we have no more business, I look for a motion. Told you I can't talk. I look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? We adjourn at 8:05 p.m.
Thank you.
Before you guys all run off, I have a question. As I said, I'm working on this project with John Vaughn, and the reason I got involved in it is because I'm trying to get photographs of the stained glass windows that were in the Wesley Chapel that are now in the Broomfield Methodist Church. I am looking for someone who knows how to take photographs of stained glass windows. Because the church is willing, they have a lift, but I need somebody who has talent to do that, and it's not me. So if you know a photographer who you think has the ability to do that, or not, shoot me an email or something would be fine. We're just trying to, at the Historical Society, we are trying to get the history of those windows and images. And one of the things that one of the other reasons, because in talking to John Vaughn, if we have some nice images of the windows, they can be incorporated into the signage that will be at the cemetery. Since we have very few other images of the church itself, we have two really poor images. Windows actually exist right now, and they're actually pretty. So,
Mary,
yeah,
I do believe I have a document somewhere that was done a decade ago.
I have those documents, and I have
Okay.
nothing beyond. I mean, some of those documents are a little sketchy, and in fact, there's still one person who's on the windows who I cannot figure out who she is at all. But at this point, it's the photography is the thing that is holding us or holding me up. It needs to be, like I said, it needs to be somebody who's got decent photographic experience. I don't want to take these pictures with my phone. And you have to get on a lift and go up to where they are too. You can't take them for the ground. So if you come across somebody, let me know. I appreciate it. And otherwise, thank you all for being here, and we will talk again in the spring. Does that sound good? Yeah. Thank you. And Rich, if you want to let me know about a time when I will start working on some kind of a mock-up of the letter, and I'll send it to Gargi, and we can see about getting those out. I'd love it if we could get them out before the next meeting.
Yeah, I can help you put the sales spin on it. That's my specialty.
Okay, well, good. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everybody.